this is Zach with 8020 Media, back again today with another Common Problems video, and today we're going to be going over the 5.7 Hemi V8 engine. And to kick things off, the 5.7 Hemi made its debut back in 2003 in the Ram 1500. It debuted with 345 horsepower, and the engine still lives on today as of 2022 in a number of models, everything ranging from the Charger, Challenger, Ram trucks, Dodge Durango, Chrysler 300. So it's been in quite a few vehicles throughout its nearly 2-decade lifespan so far. And again, it's still in production today. But anyway, the 5.7 Hemi is an overhead valve pushrod engine, and it's an iron block, which is a rare design by modern standards, as most manufacturers ditched the iron block at least a couple decades ago in favor of lighter aluminum engines or aluminum blocks for weight savings and better fuel economy. So anyway, the 5.7 Hemi is a little bit of an old school engine in itself with the overhead valve design and cast iron block. Today, the 5.7 Hemi makes up to 395 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque in the Ram 1500 trucks. In most of the other models, cars and trucks it's in a similar ballpark, around 375 to 395 horsepower and 400 to 410 torque. Since its introduction in 2003, the 5.7 Hemi went through one fairly big update in 2009. The updated engine is commonly referred to as the 5.7 Eagle. And one big update that came with the Eagle was a new cylinder head to improve flow. So there were multiple changes within the cylinder head just to offer better flow, and that's part of the reason it delivers better power nowadays. Another update was variable cam timing, or VCT for short. So that variable cam timing is able to also provide a better power band, improve emissions, so on and so forth. So a couple great updates there. There were also intake manifold updates. All of the manifolds on the 5.7 Eagle were updated. However, it is model specific. Certain versions like the Ram 1500 with the 5.7 Hemi use an intake manifold with active runners, and that's why those engines offer a little bit more power. The active runners help with the overall power band, help deliver better low-end torque as well as better top-end power. So again, those intake manifold updates overall provide better flow on the newer models, but it is model specific. And there are a few different intake manifolds depending on whether it's a Ram 1500, Charger, Chrysler 300, so on. Also, from 2009, actually, one more point to bring up with the 5.7 Hemi was actually one of the first additions to it. Started in 2005 when Chrysler began adding the Multi-Displacement system, or MDS for short. And essentially the way that functions is when you're just cruising and don't need the power, it's essentially shutting down 4 cylinders and operating as a 4-cylinder engine instead of a V8. That was to help, again, since the Hemi is a little bit of an older designed engine, that was one update to help it meet emissions and fuel economy standards. But with the 5.7 Eagle, certain models, anything with the 6-speed transmission as well as heavy-duty trucks, did not receive MDS, so those are non-MDS models, whereas pretty much every 5.7 Hemi built after 2005-2006 features the multi-displacement system. Anyway, that's most of what we had to cover here with the background information with the 5.7 Hemi. So with that out of the way, we'll go ahead and jump into 4 of the most common issues with the 5.7 liter Hemi. One other thing that I hadn't touched on yet is the 5.7 Hemi. I may have referred to it this way a couple times throughout the video. I guess I forgot before, but it is also commonly known as the 345 Hemi in honor of its 345 cubic inch displacement. So anyway, 4 common issues with the 345 Hemi, starting off with engine tick. And this topic is a little bit challenging because there isn't always one cause of engine tick, and sometimes engines make ticking sounds naturally, and some people chalk up the 5.7 ticking as just kind of a natural engine tick. But there are a couple other things to look out for related to the engine tick. That is a common symptom that pops up with a few other issues that we will be discussing here today, including broken exhaust manifold bolts, and that is debatably the most common issue on the 5.7 Hemi. And when those the exhaust manifold bolts break, you develop a little exhaust leak near the headers or near the manifold, and that can create an engine ticking sound. Pretty minor issue in the grand scheme of things. It's not necessarily an urgent fix, but depending on how bad the leak is from the manifold, you can hear ticking, you might kind of smell some raw exhaust smells, things of that nature, but ultimately that shouldn't cause any major problems or concerns. Leaving that for a while, it's still best to address it at some point because it could have certain inspection or emissions issues. But for the most part, again, very common issue, but one of the least concerning issues with the 5.7 Hemi is those exhaust manifold bolts. So moving on to the third issue, MDS problems, and this is what also ties into the engine ticking that we briefly touched on as kind of the first common issue with the 5.7 Hemi. The MDS system, in theory, is great technology when you don't need the extra power, when you don't need the extra torque. Shut down 4 cylinders so you can get better, lower emissions, better fuel economy. However, there are some unknowns with the MDS technology. For example, shutting down, it always shuts down the same 4 cylinders. And of course, when those cylinders aren't firing, they're not going to run quite as hot as the other cylinders, and all of a sudden they're called back into action when you need the power and you need the torque. And so that can certainly cause some potential heating and cooling issues, which can lead to certain oil flow problems. And that's really where the MDS ties into the engine tick. And one of the most common causes of engine tick is faulty or seized lifters or lifter rollers. And that is an issue that is very commonly discussed with the 5.7 Hemi because it's one of the bigger problems that can lead to very costly repair bills. At the least, if you run into lifter or lifter roller issues, you'll be looking at replacing the camshaft, along with obviously all the other parts, the lifters, rollers, so on. One concern with that problem, and this doesn't happen very often, but if you don't catch these problems soon enough, what happens is those lifters and rollers can eventually lead to metal shavings in the oil, and hopefully most of those metal shavings should be picked up by the oil filter, but nonetheless, you still obviously don't want oil shavings kind of floating through the engine, and so there have been a few again, pretty uncommon cases though, but there have been a few cases of these lifter and lifter roller issues actually leading to complete engine replacement because some of those metal shavings got throughout the engine and damaged other components, and at that point, rebuilding is more expensive than just sourcing a new engine. So it can lead to complete engine failure. Again, not very common, but regardless, the lifter and lifter rollers can be expensive. Camshafts aren't an easy repair. It's a very lengthy repair job, so if you're not doing it on your own, you can expect to probably spend at least $1,000 to $2,000 in labor plus all of the parts that you'll need, which can add up to another $1,000 plus, and so those that engine tick or the lifter roller issues can lead to a pretty costly repair bill. So be on the lookout for that if you're in the market for a 5.7 Hemi. That covers most of the actual flaws with the Hemi that we had to discuss, but there is one other topic to bring up, and this is something that we chat about a lot just with performance-based engines or higher performance engines in general, is that maintenance costs can be a little bit on the higher side when you compare it to your average car, obviously like a Honda Civic or Toyota Camry. The 5.7 Hemi is a performance engine that can cost a bit more to maintain, and a perfect example of that is the 5.7 Hemi actually uses 16 spark plugs. I believe Chrysler recommends replacement every 30,000 miles, which is a good ballpark. Every 30 to 40,000 miles, you should replace the spark plugs. It's not common to end up with a faulty spark plug, but they are wear and tear items, and some may wear down faster than others. And so with 16 spark plugs in the V8 Hemi, just leaves a lot of room for potential misfires, potential issues with the ignition system. Standard maintenance, so not really something that we think is fair to consider a true common problem, but it's just something to keep in mind that a performance engine like the 5.7 Hemi has some extra features like the 16 spark plugs, which helps create a more complete burn. So that's better for emissions, but it also does help improve power a little bit. And that's pretty much it for 5.7 Hemi problems. Overall, it's a pretty reliable engine. It's certainly far from the most reliable engine out there, but it's also probably above average compared to, looking at your typical engine, what kind of problems, how much they cost to own and maintain. The 5.7 Hemi is probably about on the average to slightly above average side, outside of the lifter roller issues, which could be caused in part by MDS, but outside of those lifter roller problems, there really aren't any major concerns or flaws with the Hemi. Again, those exhaust manifold bolts are one of the most common issues, but that's a cheap, simple repair that isn't urgent. And other than that, 16 spark plugs just kind of more of a maintenance point, and in fact that, there is going to be a little more maintenance with the 5.7 Hemi, but otherwise, solid engine overall, not really any reliability concerns, nothing that should scare you away from buying a 5.7 Hemi. But again, just be on the lookout for that engine ticking, as it could be an indication that the lifters or lifter rollers are on their way out. Otherwise, stuff we say for every car, use quality oils, change fluids on time. If problems do occur, fix them in a timely manner. Do all of that with the 5.7 Hemi. Chances are you'll get 200,000 plus miles out of it, with few major issues along the way. So ultimately, solid engine, and I think that wraps it up for the 5.7 Hemi common problems discussion here. And if you guys like this video, please feel free to comment down below, subscribe to the channel, or hit the like button.